Afghanistan, a country of 37 million people, has one of the fastest growing populations on the planet and will soon be more populous than Canada or Poland. This country is bordered by Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan. Afghanistan is located at a strategic crossroads that connects the civilizations of Iran, Central Asia, and East Asia to India. It is one of the most mountainous countries in the world. However, the city is also home to a vast network of fertile rivers and valleys. It is caused by massive snowmelt that has flowed from the Hindu Kush and other mountain ranges that cover the country. More than 4,000 years ago, the farmers of this region started to settle in the city. Little is known about these first ancient city-states, except that those in the north, in the land known as Bactria, were culturally related to the people of Central Asia, while those in the southeast were strongly influenced by the civilization of the Indus Valley. Some cities in Afghanistan were probably founded by the colonists from the south. However, until more archaeological work is done, Afghanistan's ancient past will remain largely a mystery. Even Kabul, the present-day capital of Afghanistan, has probably been continuously inhabited for over 3,500 years, with its exact origin and who built it unknown. In the 7th century BC, the Medes, one of the northern peoples of Iran, were the first to conquer and unite the land under their rule, which lasted almost a little over a century. They were shot down by bystanders, reinforced Persians who divided the empire into satrapies or provinces. At the time of the conquests of Alexander the Great, Iranian people, language, culture, and religion were prevalent in present-day Afghanistan, with significant Buddhist and Greek minorities that the Persians had settled in their western provinces in previous centuries. Alexander faced some of the most formidable resistance to his conquests in Bactria, which is probably the main reason he married the Bactrian princess Roxana. He had a son named Iskandar, who secured the loyalty of many Western nobles and people, and gained access to India through the strategically important Khyber Pass. Alexander also established several Greek colonies in the region, which later became important political, commercial, and military centers. The Macedonian generals Heliochus and his descendants ruled much of the eastern parts of Alexander's empire in the years following Alexander's death at the age of 32. Control over Bakhtiari and the Indus Valley was weak at worst. By 300 BC, much of this territory had fallen to the Indian Mauryan Empire of Chandragupta. In the peace that followed the war between the two empires, Chandragupta married the daughter of Heliochus and presented his father-in-law with 500 trained war elephants, which he used in his wars in the west. Soon after, the western Greek cities overthrew Seleucid rule and established a wealthy kingdom that controlled much of the overland trade to China and India. They were able to withstand a major Seleucid invasion and a nearly 3-year siege of their capital Balkh, forcing the exhausted Seleucids to sue for peace. Over the next 2 decades, the Seleucid Empire was also severely weakened by the rise of another of their former vassals, the Parthians. In the southeast, the Mauryan Empire collapsed. The Greco-Bactrians were then able to effectively fill much of the power vacuum left by the two empires, but their success was halted by internal divisions. As most of the army was in India expanding Greco-Bactrian territory, the king was overthrown by a usurper. The division of the empire into 2 kingdoms, both of which experienced decades of relative stability and prosperity, and a cultural flourishing that was a unique fusion of Greek, Iranian, Indian, and other Central Asian cultures. After the Bactrian Greeks suffered a series of severe military defeats at the hands of the Parthians, successive waves of nomadic invaders overcame them. The most powerful of these tribal confederations were the Uz and Saka, or Scythians, who controlled the lower Indus Valley. The Uz settled in Bactria, and over time became largely assimilated with the local people. After the waves of nomadic invasion subsided to some extent, the Parthians conquered a large part of the east up to the Indus River. The Parthian Ashkan dynasty was very hands-off in their style of government and were content as long as taxes were paid and people supplied the army when needed. And as they became increasingly focused on halting Roman expansion into Mesopotamia, the Parthian aristocratic family that had defeated the Scythians and taken control of the Indus River broke away from the empire. establishing the Surin Kingdom, or more commonly called the Indo-Parthian Kingdom. And although they ceased to pay taxes, and their king claimed equal status to the Parthian Great King, the two states appeared to have been allies and deeply involved in each other's politics. In the north, the Greco-Bactrian people and Uzi tribes formed the Kushan Kingdom and became an empire at the expense of the Parthians, and then expanded deep into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. The Kushans worshipped Greek as well as Hindu gods, but gradually over time, Buddhism became more prevalent and was widely promoted within the empire's borders. And even without, with Buddhist merchants and missionaries traveling to Han China, which many believe were the first to introduce Buddhism to China. The Kushan Empire was the crossroads of the world. Manufactured goods from as far away as China, Rome, and Aksumite Ethiopia would have been common sights in the great cities of the Kushan Empire. In the west, the Parthians succumbed to internal infighting, which allowed the Sassanid Persians to overthrow them, viewing themselves as the re-establishment of the ancient Achaemenid Persian Empire that Alexander had toppled. The reinvigorated Persians successfully campaigned to the north, south, east, and west, quickly overrunning the Kushan Empire, and established the Kushan Shahs as vassal kings of a greatly diminished territory, and were gradually stripped of their military and administrative power. During the intermediate period of Sasanian decline, the nomadic Kittites and then Hephthalites gained control over the eastern portion of the empire, and like the Yuzi before them, they largely adopted much of the local culture before being reconquered by the. It was during Sasanian rule that the first recorded instance of the term Afghan was made in reference to the people inhabiting the mountainous eastern provinces of the empire, and is likely derived from the Pashtun ethnic group, which is the largest in Afghanistan. By the time of this region's conquest by the Arab caliphates, Buddhism and the Persian Zoroastrian faith were the dominant religions in the land that proved difficult to control. Whenever a large army left, the locals would rebel and revert to their ancient customs and self-rule. In the east, Kabul managed to remain an independent, wealthy city-state controlling trade through the Khyber Pass to India, ruled over by Buddhists and Hindus. It was not until the late 9th century that the Safarid dynasty, founded by a Persian coppersmith born in southwestern Afghanistan, successfully rebelled against the Abbasid Caliphate and firmly established local rule, that Afghans began to convert to Islam, which the dynasty widely promoted. The Safarids were overthrown by the Samanid Empire, whose rulers claimed descent from the Sasanian Persians and extensively promoted Persian culture and Islam throughout the empire. They made the mistake of utilizing Turkic slave soldiers, which in time overthrew them and established the Ghaznavid dynasty. Based out of the city of Ghazna in eastern Afghanistan, they continued the policies of promoting Islam and Persian culture, particularly among the nomadic Turkic tribes that were settled within the empire. The Ghaznavids were greatly weakened by conflict with the Seljuk Turk Empire, which allowed for their overthrow by the native Ghurid dynasty, which had recently converted from Buddhism to Islam and were possibly of Pashtun descent. During the reign of Sultan Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad, the Ghurid Sultanate became a major world power, stretching from the Iranian plateau to Bengal. And however, after Ghiyath al-Din's death, the empire fell into infighting and was rapidly conquered by both the Delhi Sultanate in India and the Empire of Khurism, both of Turkic Mamluk origin, only 15 years after their conquest of the Ghurid Sultanate. Khurism was overrun by the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan, who frequently massacred the populations of cities that did not immediately surrender. The Mongol Empire split into several successor states not long after their conquest of the Ilkhanate, as the name coincidentally implies, fell ill and was ravaged by the plague, wiping out much of the Mongol royal family and army. As the Ilkhanate fragmented into many small states, the Tajik vassal princes of Herat established a sizable kingdom for a short time. All of these small states were conquered by the Turco-Mongol warlord Tamerlane, who inflicted even greater slaughter and destruction throughout the Near East than the Mongols had done a few generations before. Timur frequently used Afghanistan as his base of operations, and his descendants moved the capital from Samarkand to Herat. The century after Timur's death began with peace and prosperity and ended with internal conflicts and civil war, and its territory was lost to the Uzbeks in the north, to the Safavid Persians in the west, and to the emerging Mongol Empire in the southeast. Claiming descent from Timur and Genghis Khan, he conquered most of India. During the 17th century, Afghanistan became a largely autonomous buffer zone between the powerful Safavid and Mughal empires. In 1709, the Pashtun Hotak dynasty successfully rebelled and established a short-lived empire by conquering much of Iran. The Safavid Empire was overthrown by the rich soldier Nadir Shah. He was the son of an ordinary herdsman and one of the most brilliant military strategists who ever lived. He reconquered Afghanistan and defeated the Ottoman and Mongol armies, but his reign was cut short by an assassination at the age of 48. One of his cavalry commanders, Ahmad Shah Durrani, was a Pashtun and returned to his homeland, where a confederation of Pashtun tribes elected him as their leader. He made great use of his military experience and conquered the cities that did not join his cause in Afghanistan. And during his long reign of 25 years, he fought successfully in India 3 times against the Marathas and the Mughals, and even sacked their capital city of Delhi in 1757. And Ahmad Shah Durrani as the father of the nation. After defeating the Sikhs and driving them out of the Indian subcontinent, the empire fell. However, the biggest factor in their decline may have been economic, as trade to China was cut off due to poor diplomatic relations, and traffic on the ancient land trade routes that connected India, Iran, and Central Asia all but disappeared. This was due to the expansion of the Russian Empire into Central Asia and the British East India Company's dominance of maritime trade. It leaves Afghanistan in a more isolated state than it has been in over 2,000 years, but at the same time, more unified. Following a majority religion in the country, Sunni Islam and the concept of Afghan national identity regardless of tribal and ethnic affiliation became popular. The Durranis were overthrown by Dost Muhammad Khan, who established the Emirate of Afghanistan. The British, who had largely dominated India and its revenues, feared that the Russians would capture Afghanistan and use it as a stage to capture India from them. So to prevent the Russians, they attacked instead and reinstated the deposed king of Durrani, who was deeply disliked. After encountering minimal resistance to the conquest and occupation of the country, the British withdrew most of their forces to India. The remaining British occupation forces were then ambushed and almost completely massacred as they attempted to withdraw from the country. In an event that shocked Great Britain and the Western world, the Afghans then restored Dost Muhammad Khan to the throne of the country. Nearly 4 decades after the first invasion, Britain struck again. Peace was concluded after both sides suffered heavy casualties. Afghanistan became a British protectorate, with the Afghans fully sovereign and the British handling their foreign affairs, which they didn't do much of anyway. It means that there is no sympathy with the Ruskies. 40 years later, in the Third Anglo-Afghan War, 120,000 Afghans invaded India. After a few short skirmishes with the British, a treaty was concluded in which Afghanistan was internationally recognized as a fully independent country. A few years later, in 1926, the country became the Kingdom of Afghanistan and began the process of modernization and increased contact with the outside world. In 1973, the monarchy was overthrown in a bloodless coup by the king's cousin, Muhammad Dawood Khan, who became president of a one-party republic, which mostly sought to modernize the country and received aid from the Soviet Union and the United States. Both of them tried to influence the country. In 1978, Dawood and many of his family members were assassinated during a communist coup that established the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. This Soviet-backed government carried out extensive reforms that sought to modernize and abolish most of the traditional and religious social structures. This sparked widespread rebellion, and the Soviets engaged in a long war of attrition that lasted almost 10 years and caused millions of refugees to flee the country. A few years after the withdrawal of the Soviet Union forces, the Islamic State of Afghanistan overthrew the government and captured cities. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was largely overthrown in 1996 and established a totalitarian government. They were ousted 5 years later by U.S. and Northern Alliance forces and established the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in 2004. And then the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan fell by the Taliban in 2021. And the Taliban established a government called the Islamic Emirate, which has not been recognized until now. I will end the video here. Please subscribe to this channel to be aware of my new videos. Thank you for watching.